Welcome! Have you ever wondered how a single country can feel like many worlds in one? In today's journey, we'll explore the United States of America through storytelling. As the story unfolds, you'll naturally absorb new vocabulary, sharpen your listening skills, understand how sentences flow, and pick up expressions real speakers use every day. By the end of this video, you won't just know more English. You'll feel confident thinking and speaking in it. Part 1. The Birth of the United States. Long ago, before the United States became a powerful and famous country, the land was quiet, wide, and full of nature. There were no large cities, no tall buildings, and no busy highways. Forests covered the land. Rivers flowed freely. Mountains stood tall and silent. This land was home to many Native American tribes. They lived close to nature, hunted animals, grew food, and followed traditions that were passed down from generation to generation. For thousands of years, Native Americans lived on this land. They had different languages, cultures, and ways of life. Some tribes were farmers, others were hunters. Some lived in villages, while others moved from place to place. The land was not empty. It was alive with people, stories, and history. Everything began to change in the late 1400s. In 1492, a European explorer named Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. He was looking for a new route to Asia, but instead, he reached lands that Europeans did not know before. This moment changed the world forever. After Columbus, many explorers from Europe came to North America. They came from Spain, France, the Netherlands, and especially England. These explorers were curious, brave, and sometimes greedy. They wanted land, gold, power, and new opportunities. Slowly, Europeans began to settle on the eastern coast of North America. They built small towns and villages. These settlements were the beginning of what would later become the United States. One of the most important early English settlements was Jamestown, founded in 1607. Life in Jamestown was very hard. Many settlers were not farmers. They did not know how to survive in the new land. There was hunger, sickness, and fear. Many people died in the first years, but some survived. They learned how to grow food and adapt to the new environment. A few years later, in 1620, another group of settlers arrived. They were called the Pilgrims. They traveled on a ship called the Mayflower. The Pilgrims were not looking for gold or power. They wanted religious freedom. In England, they were not allowed to practice their religion freely. So they decided to leave their home and start a new life. The Pilgrims landed in a place called Plymouth. Their first winter was terrible. Cold weather, hunger, and disease killed many of them. But with help from Native Americans, especially a man named Squanto, they learned how to farm and survive. This cooperation later became part of the story behind Thanksgiving. Over time, more and more people came from Europe. These settlers formed 13 colonies along the eastern coast. Each colony had its own rules, economy, and way of life. Some colonies focused on farming, others focused on trade or fishing. Life was still difficult, but people believed in a better future. The colonies were controlled by Great Britain. The British king and government made the laws. At first, many colonists were loyal to Britain. They thought of themselves as British citizens. But slowly, problems began to grow. One major problem was taxes. Britain needed money, especially after fighting expensive wars. So the British government began to tax the colonies. They taxed paper, tea, sugar, and other goods. But the colonists were angry. They had no representatives in the British government. They believed this was unfair. They began to say a famous sentence, "No taxation without representation." This idea became very powerful. The colonists believed in freedom. They believed people should have a voice in their government. Many were inspired by new ideas from Europe, especially ideas about democracy and human rights. Writers like John Locke talked about freedom, equality, and the rights of individuals. These ideas spread through books, newspapers, and conversations. Tension between Britain and the colonies continued to grow. British soldiers were sent to control the colonies. This made people even angrier. One famous event was the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Colonists dressed as Native Americans and threw British tea into the ocean. This was a protest against unfair taxes. Britain responded with punishment. They closed ports and sent more soldiers. At this point, many colonists realized that peace might not be possible. In 1775, fighting began. This was the start of the American Revolutionary War. The colonies were now fighting against one of the strongest empires in the world. Many people believed the colonies would lose. They had fewer soldiers, less money, and less experience. But the colonists had something powerful: belief. They believed they were fighting for freedom. In 1776, leaders from the 13 colonies met and wrote an important document. It was called the Declaration of Independence. One of the main writers was Thomas Jefferson. The document said that the colonies were no longer part of Britain. It said that all people are born equal and have natural rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was a bold and dangerous decision. If the colonies lost the war, the leaders could be executed. But they signed the document anyway. They believed the idea of freedom was worth the risk. This moment marked the birth of the United States of America. However, independence was only words on paper. The real challenge was still ahead. The war was far from over. The colonies still had to fight, suffer, and sacrifice to become a real nation. Part 2. Struggle, Sacrifice, and Growth. After the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, the situation became more serious and dangerous. Words were no longer enough. The colonies now had to defend their decision on the battlefield. The American Revolutionary War continued with great intensity, and the future of the new nation was uncertain. The British Army was powerful. It was well-trained, well-funded, and experienced. The American Army, called the Continental Army, was very different. Many soldiers were farmers, workers, or young men with little training. They lacked proper weapons, uniforms, and food. Some soldiers did not even have shoes. Winter was especially cruel. The leader of the American Army was George Washington. He was calm, patient, and strong. Washington was not a perfect general, but he had something very important: determination. He believed deeply in the cause of freedom. Even when the army lost battles, he did not give up. He kept the army together during the hardest times. One of the most difficult moments came during the winter at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778. Soldiers suffered from cold, hunger, and disease. Many wanted to leave, but Washington stayed. He encouraged his men and worked to improve discipline and training. Slowly, the army became stronger. The war was not only fought with guns and soldiers, it was also fought with ideas and confirmed alliances. The colonies needed help. Alone, defeating Britain was almost impossible, so they looked to Europe. France became a key ally. France had its own reasons for helping. It wanted to weaken Britain, its old enemy. France provided money, weapons, soldiers, and ships. This support changed the direction of the war. Without France, American independence might not have been possible. In 1781, a major battle took place at Yorktown. British General Cornwallis was trapped by American and French forces. With no escape, he surrendered. This battle effectively ended the war. 2 years later, in 1783, Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States in the Treaty of Paris. The war was over. But independence was only the beginning of a new challenge. Now the former colonies had to become a real country. At first, the United States was weak. The government was based on a system called the Articles of Confederation. This system gave most power to the individual states and very little power to the central government. The idea was to avoid another powerful ruler like the British king. However, this system had serious problems. The national government could not collect taxes. It could not control trade between states. It could not easily raise an army. As a result, the country struggled with debt, economic problems, and internal conflict. One famous example of this weakness was Shays' Rebellion in 1786. Farmers in Massachusetts were angry about high taxes and debt. They rebelled against the state government. The national government was too weak to respond effectively. This frightened many leaders. They realized that the country needed a stronger government to survive. In 1787, leaders from the states met in Philadelphia. This meeting is known as the Constitutional Convention. Their goal was to fix the government. Instead, they decided to create a completely new system. They wrote the United States Constitution. The Constitution created a balanced government with 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Each branch had its own powers. This system was designed to prevent any one person or group from becoming too powerful. This idea is called checks and balances. The Constitution also created a federal system. Power was shared between the national government and the states. This helped unite the country while still respecting local control. However, not everyone was satisfied. Many people worried that the new government would be too strong. They feared it might take away individual freedoms. To solve this problem, the leaders added the Bill of Rights. These were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. They guaranteed important freedoms, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to a fair trial. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. His leadership helped stabilize the country. He set many important examples, including stepping down after 2 terms. This showed that no one should rule forever. Despite these successes, the country still faced deep problems. One of the biggest issues was slavery. Slavery existed in many states, especially in the South. Enslaved people were forced to work without freedom or rights. This was a clear contradiction to the ideas of equality and liberty written in the Declaration of Independence. At the time, leaders avoided solving this issue completely. They feared it would divide the nation. Another challenge was expansion. Americans believed strongly in moving west. They wanted land, opportunity, and a better life. This belief later became known as manifest destiny. As settlers moved west, new states were formed, but this expansion often came at a terrible cost to Native Americans, who were pushed off their lands through violence and unfair treaties. The young nation was growing fast, but it was also carrying deep conflicts within it. Economically, the country began to develop. Trade increased. Cities grew. Farmers, merchants, and craftsmen played important roles. Immigration from Europe continued, bringing new cultures, skills, and ideas. By the early 1800s, the United States was no longer just a fragile experiment. It was becoming a real power. But the question remained, could this nation survive its own contradictions? Could a country built on freedom continue to ignore injustice? Those questions would shape the next chapter of the American story. Part 3. A Nation Tested and Transformed. As the United States moved into the 19th century, it stood at a crossroads. It was larger, richer, and more confident than before. But deep inside, The nation was divided. The biggest and most painful issue was slavery. For decades, leaders had avoided solving it. Now it could no longer be ignored. The country began to split into two parts. The northern states were becoming more industrial. They had factories, cities, and growing trade. Slavery was slowly disappearing there. The southern states depended heavily on agriculture, especially cotton. Their economy relied on enslaved labor. These differences created fear, anger, and mistrust. As new states joined the Union, Americans argued fiercely about whether slavery should be allowed in those states. Compromises were made, but each one only delayed the problem. The tension continued to grow. In 1861, the conflict finally exploded. The American Civil War began. Southern states left the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. The North, led by President Abraham Lincoln, fought to preserve the Union. At first, the war was about keeping the country together, but over time it became a war about freedom. The Civil War was one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history. Families were divided, cities were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of soldiers died. Yet, from this suffering came a turning point. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that enslaved people in Confederate states were free. This did not immediately end slavery, but it changed the meaning of the war. The fight was now clearly about human freedom. In 1865, the war ended. The Union was preserved, and slavery was officially abolished through the 13th Amendment. The nation had survived its greatest test, but healing would take a long time. After the war, the United States entered a period of rebuilding called Reconstruction. The country tried to bring the southern states back into the Union and define freedom for formerly enslaved people. Amendments were added to the Constitution to grant citizenship and voting rights. However, progress was slow and often resisted. Racism and discrimination did not disappear. Many African Americans continued to face injustice, violence, and inequality for generations. Despite these struggles, the nation continued to grow. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were times of rapid change. Factories expanded, railroads connected the country. Millions of immigrants arrived from Europe, Asia, and elsewhere, searching for opportunity. Life was not easy, but hope was strong. The United States began to play a larger role in the world. During the 20th century, two world wars changed everything. In World War I and World War II, the United States became a key global power. Its economy, military, and influence grew rapidly. After World War II, America emerged as one of the most powerful nations on Earth. At the same time, the country continued to struggle with its own values. In the 1950s and 1960s, the civil rights movement rose. African Americans and their allies demanded equality under the law. Peaceful protests, speeches, and courage led to major changes. One of the most famous leaders was Martin Luther King, Jr. His dream of justice and equality inspired millions. Laws were passed to end segregation and protect voting rights. These victories did not solve everything, but they moved the nation closer to its founding ideals. In the modern era, the United States is complex and diverse. It is a country of many cultures, languages, and beliefs. It leads in technology, entertainment, science, and education. American movies, music, and ideas reach people all over the world. At the same time, challenges remain. Political divisions, economic inequality, and social issues continue to test the nation. The story of the United States is not perfect. It never has been. But that is also the lesson. The United States was not born complete. It was born as an idea that people are equal, an idea that freedom matters, an idea that a nation can change, improve, and learn from its mistakes. This idea is what keeps the story alive. For English learners, the story of the United States is more than history. It is a journey of words, struggles, and hopes. Through its story, we learn not only language, but values, culture, and human experience. And like all great stories, it continues.